Hello, and welcome back to our series on beginning app script for HR, brought to you by Prairie HR Solutions. My name is Jake Finger, Principal Consultant here at Prairie HR Solutions, and in today's video, I would like to pick up where we left off from our last video and talk about a different method. So in the last video, what we did was we went over the map method and how we could isolate a specific index or column in our data, such as our email, and then only pull out those values and create another array. And we also went over how we could use that array again, or use map method to change something. Like we can change this to all lowercase, we can change the email to all uppercase, or what have you. And in today's video, I'd like to talk about a different method, and that's called a filter method. So up to this point, we were just grabbing essentially a column of information and putting it in a new array. So what filter method does is exactly what you would think filter would do. So say we would like to find all of our HR generalists. Well, what we would do is if we were just working in our spreadsheet, we would just filter all this data and then filter it down. The point of automation, though, is to get ourselves out of that practical, transactional, manual activity and have our app script do it for us automatically, just part of a function. We can just embed it in a function and just have it do it. So we're not wanting to just pull a single column. We want to pull the whole thing. So we want to go through and say we want to pull division, everybody in the IT division. What we would do is we would go 0, 1, 2, 3, and we would filter all of this data based on the value within that third index. And then we would make sure that if that third index equals IT, we want to keep that data. And then we can create a new array of only the IT records. And then from there, what we can do is we can then either populate it, push it, or do something only to that new array. So let's go back to our code here and let's talk about that filter method. So I'm going to leave our map method syntax and our map method here. I went ahead and commented out the loggers just so it doesn't fill up our console log here. So with the filter method, the syntax is highly similar to our map method. So we got to give it an array. It starts with an array. And instead of map, we want to filter. And that filter is going to take a callback function. Now, this callback function doesn't need a name. It just needs to declare that it's a function. And this function is only going to run inside this filter method. When this filter method runs, that's the only time this function is going to run. But that function is going to need to take an argument. It's going to need the curly brackets, of course. And the arguments are similar to our map method arguments. It can take up to 3. It's not going to want the current value, though. What it's going to want is it's going to want the element that it's searching for and going to return. So we can just call this, we can call this anything. We'll just call this element. And then it's also going to take an index, which is optional, and an array, which is optional. Now we're going to give it this, and we're not wanting to drill down to a specific index. There are certain times when you are really doing complex data manipulation or modeling that you would drill down into an index or give it another specific array. But since we're already giving it an array up here, we're not going to drill down any further, and we're already giving it an index, just like we did down here with maps. So we're not going to need these, but these are optional. And then what we're going to do is return something. So let's focus on that division. So let's try and filter our array. So when we run this, we're going to pull up a 2-dimensional array of all of our data. And what we want to do is we don't need to work on every employee, but we do need to focus on, say, our IT division. So we want to filter all this data down and only return and create a new array for those employees and all their records in the IT division. So let's create a variable. Let's store it all in a variable. We'll just call this IT division. And let's make that variable equal to a filter. So the array we're using is our employee data. Go here, employee data. And we want to filter that data. It needs a callback function. And this first argument, we can call it anything really. Let's just call this division, because that's really what it's going to be, division. And our curly brackets, semicolon. Okay, so there we go. So now let's work on some content for our function that we're going to run with our filter method. We can think of filtering as a logical statement, and we're wanting to return a row of data or an array, a one-dimensional array, if a certain index equals something. In our case, if it equals IT. So what we can do here is we can return division, because that's really what the element is. We're returning the division, and we called this argument division, but what this division really is, what we're really wanting it to be, and how it's going to return is the entire individual array. So when we talk about element or current value, in our case element for a filter, let's run this and I'll pull up all our data. What we're wanting to do is we want to go through each individual inner array here and then search that third element within that array, that third index. And if that third index equals IT, we want to move it to a new array. And then it's going to go on to the next array and check that third index. If it's HR or IT, then it keeps it. If not, it just skips over it. So what we're doing is we're actually returning arrays, and we are simply calling it division so we can reference it. So let me uncomment this out. So we want to return the division based on if that third element, and we'll go strictly equal to IT. So I think what we were going to do. Okay, so let's come up here and comment out that log, because it's going to get pretty long in our console. And let's return IT division. And let's run this and see if it goes through and pulls out only the individual employee records that are in the IT division. So we can come up here and look, and it sure does. Pulls out all the records that are in the IT division. Now, I used strictly equal to, because if we didn't, let me go over here and let's find one with just a couple, or one. Finance. Okay, so let's use finance. Let's come back over here and change IT to finance. And we should have one new array, because there's really only one employee there. And when we are strictly searching for a condition with these three equal signs, we are going through and making sure that it is exactly this way. It is the same. It is the same type, the same capitalization, and exactly identical to the way it's written in our sheet. Now, say instead we just use one equal sign for a string, and we run that. you'll notice that it pulls up so much more. Because what ends up happening is it's searching through that, and anything that is essentially remotely similar to finance may start out with an F, may contain FI. It's going to pull and save. So when we think about strings, especially if we are checking if a string is or an element is equal to something, we want to use the three equal signs if we are wanting it to be exactly equal to that. Now, we could be a little loose and say, well, we just want to filter something that even remotely resembles finance. Like we could do this with an employee name. And in the instance of employee names, sometimes we are not used to the spelling of a specific last name, but we know the first three. We know the first three letters. So you could just simply put those first three letters and then take this all the way down to one, which will get you close. But when we really know that this is exactly what it is we're looking for, use those three equal signs to make sure that you're not getting extra data coming in. Now, instead of hard coding this, just like in our other examples, instead of hard coding, what we can do is put this in a variable. So let's just call this division, and our division is equal to finance. And instead of having to write finance in here, we can simply pass that variable value. And again, strictly equal to, because it's a string and we want it to exactly equal finance. And then when we run this, it's going to pull up the same exact thing. Did I spell it wrong? Finance. Let's see why I emptied an array. Oh, no, didn't spell it wrong. I used the element that we were pushing as a variable name. So let's change this to division. Let's do this instead of division because we're using that as the element name. So you got to make sure that if you're referencing something, it is unique. And it's unique to what it is that you're referencing. So we just can't keep using division. And that's the reason why it populated a blank array, because there's nothing in here because we were trying to give it. It was essentially an oncurring loop of nothingness. So instead of division, let's call this comp div. And what we're wanting this to be equal to is comp div. And now let's run this. And you'll see that it's pulling out only the finance, which is stored in that variable. Now, the great thing with this variable is if this was part of a larger function, and like just for the sake of illustrations, if this was part of a larger function, we'll just call this function pull division. And say that this function here received an argument. Received an argument, and that argument came from something else. For example, we have a web page or a web app or even a UI over on our side here, a sidebar on our sheet, and we're having new employees enter their information, or we're manually entering their information, or the manager, whatever, and we grab a value from a field, say in our case, the division value, and we send that value, which is in the form of a function. We use a function to grab a value, and then we return that value, and that return value is an argument for another function, or can be used as an argument for another function. So instead of having this comp division here, we can set this comp division variable not to finance, but to whatever that to whatever is being returned from that other function pulling that field. And say they are entering finance in that field, that function runs over there, returns that value, which is finance, and then it sends it over here to this function, and this function then uses that returned value to run its filter. And we are going to get into this once we start dealing with HTML services and going over sidebars or web apps, because we're going to be doing this a lot. Because the intent of automation, again, is to get ourselves out of this spreadsheet and have our Google Apps script do as much as possible. And the best way to do that is through a simple web app or a HTML UI user interface that can be ran on a phone, a tablet, or whatever. And then all of our calculations and the manual stuff are happening within our functions away from the view, kind of in the background. And then it just returns the results. That's the point of automation. So we're going to do this concept in the future episodes once we start talking about HTML services and UIs and things like that. So now let's create that comp div. And I want to do one more. Instead of, not do finance, let's do HR. And then let's run this. Whoops. There we go. Got a little happy with the equal sign. So these are all of our HR employees. And now what we can do after we filter this data is grab each array. And if we wanted to drill in, because remember, we are creating a new array here. So we could actually come in and instead of simply logging it out, we can then drill into our new array. Not Luger, the logger. There you go. We can drill into our new array and say that we want to return a specific index, just like we were doing previously with our other arrays. So let's return, say, the 0 index, which would be our first instance in that array. And we would simply do division 0. And when we return it, it's going to go through, it's going to do its thing, but then it's only going to pull the array at the 0 index. And then from there, we can do other things. Like say we want to get the salary. And the salary is at 0, 1, 2, 15. So say we want to, no, that's not right. That's a zip code. Okay, so 21. Let's try 21. That should get us close. Oops. 0, 21, because if we're drilling down a level, remember it's a two-dimensional array, so we're going to need that. So it's hourly. How far off were we? Let's see. Oh, one less. So if we do 0, 20, it'll pull our salary. So if we wanted to quickly get the salary of an individual employee, we can filter by that employee's name, create a new array, and then drill into that array to pull the salary. And the other neat thing that we can do is with our filter, we can chain it essentially to other things. Like we can chain it to a map, we can chain it to other filters such as reduce, and we can carry this out further if we needed to. And in the future videos, once we start getting into more complex operations, you'll start seeing us being able to cram things together like that into a single line or a single function to handle what it is that we're trying to do. Because remember, always approach automating in Google Apps Script with this thought. If I am doing it in a Google product, if I'm doing it in a site, a sheet, if I am writing an email over and over and over again, then you can 99% of the time write a function to do exactly what it is you're doing. And so I'm going to end this video here. It's getting up to about 30 minutes. So I want to end this video and keep it, at a digestible size. And in the next video, what I'm wanting to do is we've talked quite a bit about individual methods. And the reason why we're approaching it that way is you'll find that when you code, you take little chunks like this, like I need to map some information, or what was that called again, and how do I write it? We can take this little snippet and then put it into our function and then move on and do something else. So we're not having, so it's just a series of snippets, really. It reads like a book, so to speak. But the one thing that we haven't covered is how in the world do we run this from a spreadsheet or a UI? We can't come into our script file and press run every time. Defeats the purpose of automation. So the next video, what I want to talk about is triggers. I want us to explore how it is that we can run functions automatically. So I hope you're enjoying our series here. If you are, please hit that subscribe button and we can continue bringing them to you. And until next time, please take care.